level. I'd now like to welcome Mayor A.J. Holloway from Biloxi, Mississippi. Mayor Holloway hosted our Mayor's Institute for City Design following Katrina, which was led by Mayor Joseph Riley. He's already making strides in rebuilding his community. We visited Biloxi, saw the devastation there, lost all source of income, revenue. How do you even pay for your workers that help you rebuild your city? And he has led his community for many, many years. Mayor Holloway speaks of the strength of his citizens and the bright future is stay, and he is here giving us his remarks on what he has experienced in his city of Biloxi.
Thank you for inviting me here today to speak to you about the city of Biloxi's recovery from Hurricane Katrina. Before I begin my presentation, however, I want to say something to all those mayors and city leaders from across this great country who have called or emailed us with words of encouragement or donated personnel, equipment, or money, and have adopted Biloxi as a sister city. Thank you. From the bottom of my heart and on behalf of the citizens of Biloxi, I thank you. Your gestures and your thoughts and prayers are sincerely appreciated. Words cannot adequately express our deep sense of gratitude. God bless all of you. When Tom Cochran talked to me about coming here today, he said, just come and tell the Biloxi story. And I want to thank Tom for all his leadership and support. He has been to the Gulf Coast region on several occasions. I'm also supposed to use this opportunity to give you an idea of the resources and tools that will be needed to rebuild a city like Biloxi, and to share with you the key lessons we've learned from this experience. I think any of you who have dealt with a major crisis in your city will realize that you might not know all the answers to all the questions that you will face. In dealing with an unprecedented natural disaster of the size of Katrina, we found out pretty quickly that we didn't even know all the questions that we'd be facing. A few weeks after the storm, I met a 15 Senate delegation led by Senator Thad Cochran that was visiting Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi in the Gulf Coast region of Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. They were going into Keesler to get a lunch and to get a briefing from the generals on the damage suffered by Keesler Air Force Base when Senator John Warner pulled me aside and said, Mayor Holloway, I'm an old man. I'm 80 years old, and I've been through 3 wars and 5 wives. But I'll be damned if I've ever seen anything as bad as this. President Bush made his first visit to post-Katrina Biloxi 4 days after the storm. He told me that he'd seen the TV reports and his helicopter flew over the city twice before landing. Even so, he said, you don't fully comprehend the magnitude of the destruction until, to use his words, you get your feet down in it. Having said that, let me show you a 4-minute video to give you an idea of the level of destruction in Biloxi.
The first thing we had to do, and some of us veterans that have been here through most of them, we had to basically stop a mutiny. We had folks that wanted to leave, some of the newer folks, and we had to explain to them that we thought we were in one of the safest locations on the coast because of the construction of this building, and that we thought that they were just as safe here as they were anywhere else.
People and the things, the life we had here, you just, especially on the point, you knew everybody that was living here and where they came from and who they were and what they did for a living. Coffee at McElroy's every morning with a group of people and friends, and seeing the neighborhood. It's just, it's over with.
Goodbye, my Biloxi. You've been so good to me. We've had good laughs, we've had hard times. But my heartache drowns the sea. Oh, how I loved you, but I don't want to let go. But things will never be the same. Raindrops falling all around. I lost all that I found, and I can't find my way. Oh no, I saw heaven by today. Hello to this new life. I'm not sure just what to say. Call everything that I've known has all been washed away.
driving around a couple days after the storm and seeing people in a daze trying to go through their what's left of their homes to find photographs or find anything that they can find. Just the looks on their face.
By the way, Mayor Nagin, we sell those to raise money. We have those for sale in the city of Biloxi on our website. It's a 60-minute DVD. Of course, the devastation that you see in this video and that you've seen in the national media reports tells only a part of the story. For us in government, we have to deal with what we see and what we don't see. Things like lift stations that pump wastewater to the treatment plants. The day after Katrina, every one of our 114 lift stations was out of service. Today we have just about 114 operating with Band-Aid repairs, and with some using emergency generators, which we have to review often. We have a couple of them that are not in service, but they're in neighborhoods that, fortunately or unfortunately, do not require service at this time. And 2 of our 3 wastewater treatment plants sustained major damage. But we have them up and running today, but they need major repairs. And finally, there's the monumental issue of repairing and or rebuilding the drainage and sewer systems under our streets. Our sewer system has about 235 miles of lines, and we have miles and miles of storm drains and thousands of catch basins throughout the city. Every inch of these sewer and drainage lines will have to be TV'd, flushed out, and cleared of debris, which would have been a job for our 2 vacuum trucks that we lost in the storm. Rebuilding a sewer and drainage system is going to be a monumental task, and it will begin and finish the process of performing a comprehensive assessment of the damage and get it ready to receive bids on repair and rebuilding. We can see telltale signs of the damage for our underground infrastructure throughout our city in the form of potholes and in some areas partially collapsing streets. Your water and sewer are the basics, but they are big ticket items. And it's like I've always said, you don't get on the 6 o'clock news when you dedicate a wastewater treatment plant. It's just not sexy stuff. People forget about it when they flush their toilet, but once that system malfunctions, you hear about it. Another big ticket item is rebuilding our major roadways and bridges, which is impossible to do without federal assistance. We don't have the issue that Mayor Nagin is dealing with as far as having a city built below sea level, but we're seeing the results of the older sections of our city being built on a low-lying tip of a 16 square mile peninsula. The streets in our city got a double whammy. Many were originally built decades and decades ago on shifting sands, and that fact coupled with already low water table meant that the storm surge damaged the asphalt on top of the road and saturated the soil below the road. We had hurricane-force winds for over 6 hours, and that wind kept the tide surge of water over our streets for over 3 hours. And the heavy equipment that's being used to remove the debris storm breeze now is exasperating the situation, creating gouges in the pavement and asphalt, and worse, damaging the already crumbling sewer and drainage systems. So where do we go from here? The key to our recovery is going to be reinvested from the private sector. The casino resorts, the hotels and restaurants that make up our tourism industry, as well as the revival of the small businesses and our seafood industry, and the construction of affordable housing. The role of the local government, whether it's in Biloxi, New Orleans, or any other city across the country, is to set the table for economic development, to provide essential services like clean water and wastewater treatment, a transportation system of roads that move traffic efficiently, good police and fire protection, quality public education, good parks and recreation facilities and programs. Essentially, all of the ingredients to create an attractive quality of life. the biggest challenge in creating the environment to make those things happen is having money to make it happen. Plenty of money. Once we get those basic things in place, once we are able to set that table, we will have sustainable economic development and will be well on our way to resurrecting that renaissance that we enjoyed in Biloxi before August the 29th. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Mayor Holloway. We've been reading about your city, and we're pleased that there's so much progress that has been made, but I know there's still much more to do. Our country was hit by many hurricanes in this last season. Many cities have faced evacuation and destruction and loss of lives, and there are lessons to be learned from all of these hurricanes that we have had. I'm pleased that Miami Mayor Manny Diaz is with us today. His city weathered several major hurricanes this past season, especially Hurricane Wilma. He has had hurricanes every year. Florida seems to be another favorite spot, and I'm pleased that Mayor Diaz is with us to share his thoughts. Mayor Diaz.
Good morning. Let me first join others in recognizing the tremendous efforts that Mayors Nagin and Holloway have undertaken over the last few months for their leadership and their compassion. You make us all proud to be mayors. Also, Mayor Nagin, you talked about the fact that you're in a re-election campaign. I just want to share a fact with you. In 2001, I ran for office for the first time. In the middle of the campaign, we got hit with 9/11. This year, I was running for re-election, and we had the worst hurricane season in our history. You'll be glad to know that we have term limits in Miami. As many of you know, Miami and South Florida have lived through many a hurricane. This year we had Rita, Katrina, and Wilma. Last year we had 4 storms that made landfall just north of us. And of course we all remember the pictures of Andrew in the 90s, what was then the worst natural disaster that we had ever faced. So we too have experienced death, destruction, devastation, and suffering. We too have been witness to the tremendous human and mental toll that this takes on the residents of a city being uprooted, a toll which lasts forever. The lives of our citizens are changed forever. Life as we know it will never be the same in our cities. But I can tell you that Miami, thank God, has never had to experience, nor has anyone else that I know ever have had to experience, the wrath of the natural disaster at the magnitude of what we have seen and heard this morning. And so what is the message that all of us as the nation's mayors ought to walk away with this morning? First, let me remind you that hurricane season starts once again 120 odd days from today. And as I stand here today, I am faced with the grim reality that, as Mayor O'Neill mentioned, Miami is right smack in the middle of what is known as Hurricane Alley. Living in paradise does have its costs. Each and every single year, we will take some kind of hit, or at the very least, we are found within the cone of just about every named storm that we see year after year, and have to prepare ourselves for the possibility of a direct hit in our city. And according to what all the experts are saying today, whether it's as a result of global warming, a result of El Niño, La Niña, we can reasonably expect that hurricanes will become stronger and more numerous during the decade to come, during this decade and the decade to come. Just take a look at this past hurricane season, when for the first time in American history, we ran out of letters and had to start using the Greek alphabet to name storms. Who would have thought that we were going to have Hurricane Alpha and Hurricane Gamma? We did last year. As such, if your city is located anywhere on the eastern seaboard, on the Gulf, in the Caribbean, whether you are Mayor Riley from Charleston, Mayor Delaney in Jacksonville, Mayor Ioro in Tampa, or God forbid, these same two mayors, in the next 10 to 15 years, any one of us could potentially be staring down the eye of one of these killer storms. And by the way, if you represent a city that is out of harm's way and think that hurricanes don't affect you, think of this. The federal government has already spent billions towards recovery efforts in the Gulf and will spend tens of billions more. The American taxpayer, your constituents, are paying and will continue to pay this tab. So let us be clear. Let us not view these natural disasters as isolated incidents. Although clearly the first order of the day is to rebuild the Gulf Coast, let us not make this the only order of the day. And so the question really becomes, again, what can you as mayors do when faced with such a national threat? All of us know that as mayors, we cannot run or hide. When our constituents lose the roof over their heads and have no place to go, they come to us. When they have no food or water, they come to us. When they lose their jobs, they come to us. And when they lose a loved one, they cry with us. 9/11 and the threat of terrorism showed the world what many of us already knew, that mayors are on the front line, that we are the first responders, that mayors do take charge, lead, and control our own destinies, because we cannot run and hide. And so, Madam President, Tom, and conference leadership, history requires that we step up once again. As we did after 9/11, let us exert our leadership, our energy, our vision, and our superior local knowledge on this issue of hurricane response. Let us avoid turf wars and instead begin to outline local, state, and federal responsibilities and expectations. Much in the same way that we have a national flood program, we should begin talking about a national wind program. Let us assume our responsibility and our obligation to develop emergency preparedness and response plans for our local communities and share these best practices with all of our fellow mayors. As we did after 9/11, we must prepare, we must be ready. Madam President, thank you for allowing me to share these thoughts with you this morning, and I look forward to working with all of you on this issue. Thank you. God bless.
Thank you, Mayor Diaz. I think that we have heard from hurricane experts, those of us that live where we don't have that threat, have other threats, but certainly not threats same as the hurricanes. I now want to welcome someone back to the conference who has been at the conference probably for longer than any of us have. This is a senator from Louisiana, Mary Landrieu. Her name is synonymous, I think, with Louisiana, the Landrieu name. Senator Landrieu knows this organization. Her father, Moon Landrieu, was mayor of New Orleans as well as president of the Conference of Mayors. Since Hurricane Katrina, she has fought tirelessly in the Senate for the resources for all of the areas, New Orleans, along with the many other communities devastated by the hurricanes. We've been working together to get Congress to provide not just loans, but actual operating assistance to these impacted cities. I'm so pleased she's here with us today because she is knowledgeable, and we did see her brother on the film. He is Lieutenant Governor of Louisiana. Pleased to have her with us today. Welcome, Mary Landrieu, Senator.
Thank you, Mayor, so much, and it truly is an honor to be able to address you briefly, and to all the mayors that are on this panel, and Mayor Nagin, thank you for your leadership to our country at this time, and to Tommy Cochran, thank you for your leadership to our country all the time, decade after decade, and continues to do a wonderful job in his advocacy for cities and communities all over the country. And I want to associate myself with the remarks made by the mayors before me speaking today, and particularly the mayor of Biloxi, who I think so emotionally spoke to the issue of the job that mayors and local officials have to do that just really make government work and communities thrive and people's dreams come true, but that sometimes get overlooked at the national level. And that's what I wanted to talk about just this morning, and to just share with you some of the solutions that we're putting forward at the federal level, but most certainly because of the anemic and sluggish response at the federal level, we do need to step it up. And I think the leaders that are in this room can help us to push that accelerator down and move forward to rebuild lives and dreams. I want to thank Joe Riley for his particular help to our city and the Gulf Coast, and to all the mayors and resources that he brought from this organization and the great expertise. I want to thank Tommy for coming down like the cavalry to try to get a foothold on the Gulf Coast to help. I want to thank all of the mayors that opened up your own homes, your own community shelters, your own arenas, your own places at sometimes great expense to your cities and to your state, to take in the largest mass migration of people since the Civil War. 1 million people sought shelter from the Gulf Coast. They could not find dry ground or a warm meal or a drink from clean water out of a bottle, a cup, or a bucket. And the mayors and the governors of this country understood, without having to read a script or check a textbook, what to do. And you all did it. And so did many of the businesses, large and small, around the country that opened up their doors, their pantries, their cupboards, their drug counters to give people the medicine and the food they needed to survive. But now the emergency is over, but the rebuilding has begun. The question is whether the Gulf Coast and the mayors in this room and the governors representing the coast will do it alone, or whether we will have a federal partner that's responsible, that's there, that cares, that does more than talk but delivers and gets the job done for the millions of Americans that want to return to their homes, to their churches, to their synagogues, to their schools, to the adults that have told their children about the grandparents and the great-grandparents that lived in these neighborhoods, that they would grow up here too. That is a question. We're proud to live on the Gulf Coast. A lot of us have lived there our whole life, whether in Gulfport or Biloxi or New Orleans or Waveland, where there's not a structure standing, or whether you're in Calcasieu or Cameron Parish that had 10,000 people and the only structure standing is a courthouse that was built in the 1940s by a government that used to work, and it's still standing to this day as a testimony of what government can do when it sets its mind. The only high ground where people could swim for safety was the courthouse. And if you fly over Calcasieu Parish today, it's the only building you can see that survived on the coast. The mayors have talked about the destruction of Hurricane Andrew, but just to put it in perspective, it was the worst natural disaster until Katrina and Rita, two deadly storms that hit Louisiana and Texas. To put it in clear perspective, we lost 28,000 homes in Florida. In Andrew was the most expensive storm, $40 billion. We've lost 280,000 homes in Mississippi and Louisiana from Rita and Katrina. In Louisiana alone, in one weekend, 18,000 businesses were destroyed. This is more than about New Orleans, as great a city and as my hometown and Ray Nagin's hometown. This is about a region, this is about the Gulf Coast, This is about America. This is about what we are, what we have been, and what we want to be as a country. Just like the mayor of Miami shared with you, everyone in this room has a stake, because in the year 2015, 2/3 of all Americans will live within 50 miles of a coast if you count the Great Lakes. And so besides being general taxpayers that need to make sure the money that our government spends is spent wisely, unless you're right smack in the middle of Kansas or Iowa, which you may be, or Oklahoma, or North New Mexico, your city may be pretty close to a coast. And just if you don't think that it's only the ocean that can destroy you, like the Gulf or the Pacific or the Atlantic, please let me remind you, the people of New Orleans were not drowned by the water that came out of the coast, but by a lake that is 12 feet deep at its deepest. And as the mayor said, we talk about this as a natural disaster. This was a man-made disaster, at least as far as New Orleans and Plaquemine and St. Bernard Parish are concerned in Louisiana. Because it wasn't the Gulf that came out of a 20-foot wave, as horrible as that destruction was, that you saw beautifully on that video. But a 12-foot lake where the waves normally don't get more than about 3.5 or 4 feet. I've been swimming in it my whole life, and my kids swim in it to this day. But when the levees broke, after the wind had died down, it was like a flash flood of 15 feet of water pouring through urban areas in a city that neighborhoods had been in existence since the 1920s and 30s and 40s. There's not a beach in sight. When New Orleans was founded, we didn't set it on a beach. We put it 100 miles inland to protect it, one of the great ports in America. And that great port helped to build this nation. Thomas Jefferson bought the Louisiana Purchase for 3 cents an acre. He leveraged the Treasury to do it because he knew the nation could not be great unless we secured the great mouth of the Mississippi River. And with our partners on the Gulf Coast, we have contributed mightily to the great strength of this nation. As an aside, which we're all very proud of in the Gulf Coast, the boats that landed in Normandy were built in New Orleans with 43,000 workers from the Gulf Coast that built those boats that enabled us, in just one example of the contribution that has been made over time. And now that the dreams of people, as the mayor said, who played by the rules, paid their taxes, paid their insurance, paid their mortgages, paid off their mortgages so they could hand the little house they had or the big house they had to their children and grandchildren like they're taught in America, we now have to understand that the flood insurance program that we have doesn't work. FEMA that we created doesn't work. The Corps of Engineers that was supposed to protect us doesn't work. Ladies and gentlemen, we better get about the business of making government work again. So I'm going to speak briefly about some of the solutions and give credit to a man who deserves a lot of credit. I serve on the Appropriations Committee, and I can promise you if it wasn't for Thad Cochran, the Gulf Coast would probably not have gotten even the community development block grants, which are a bare minimum that these mayors and governors need to rebuild this region. We were offered a $17 billion supplemental plan that had $1.5 billion for levees when we need so much more in New Orleans, just to meet Category 3, forget 5. And the rest of the bill offered to us by the administration was to repair federal facilities. We need highway money. We need sewer money. We need loans for people that want to get back in business, who want to work, who are not lazy and shiftless, who are desperate to get back to work. And if it wasn't for Thad Cochran, who stood up and said the bill is not enough and built a better one, I don't know what these mayors and governors would have today, so I want to thank him. But we're going to do more in community development block grant, and these mayors know how important community development block grant, shared fairly, can help to lift up a community and give you the flexibility you need. But I want to mention 2 or 3 other things very quickly. We also need for the Gulf Coast a revenue sharing because we are the nation's only energy coast. We're proud to be an energy coast. We've been drilling for oil and gas off the coast of Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama since before we were born, and we're happy to do it. But there are costs associated with that contribution. We send billions of dollars just right off the shores of Grand Island, Biloxi, and Waveland to the national government and get none of that money shared in return. I hope that our Gulf Coast will step up and say we're proud to keep the lights on from Florida to New York to California, but please share those revenues with us. We'll build our own levees. We'll manage the water better. We'll mitigate against these storms. And yes, we may have to rearrange some neighborhoods and some communities, be smarter about the way we build, adopt greater codes, and maybe we all have to pay a little bit more to do it, but it can be done. We're going to press revenue sharing for the Gulf Coast. We are proud to be America's energy coast, and I know that some areas don't want to drill, and that's a discussion for another day. But we do contribute to the energy independence of this nation. I do believe that we have to step up, not just for flood insurance reform, but maybe, general disaster insurance reform, so that whether you're hit by a tornado or a mudslide or an avalanche or a hurricane or a tornado, if you play by the rules in America, you paid your taxes, there's a system there that helps you to get back on your feet. I think we need to press forward for that. We were, of course, in Louisiana extremely disappointed that the White House yesterday decided that they didn't like the consensus plan that we put forward for the Louisiana Recovery District. We've tried to explain to the administration as respectfully as we can. The tools they have given us are not strong enough. They don't work. They are insufficient to rebuild the Gulf Coast. So they asked us to put a consensus plan together. We did, the Louisiana Recovery Corporation, which would be a new corporation that would borrow money from the national capital markets and come and help get these huge swaths of land that you've seen on these videos back into commerce, to give homeowners choices, help them recover their equity, and get property back moving from Louisiana, and if Mississippi and Texas and Alabama wanted to participate, fine. We were told yesterday that the White House can't support such an effort. It's too expensive. So we're going to take the constructive input that they have given us and go back to the table. But let me end this comment in this way. The tools we have, a FEMA that was created in 1974, a flood insurance program that doesn't really work to help people get back on their feet, and rejection by the consensus plan that Louisiana put up, and having to pull community development block grant money out of this administration and get just barely what we need to move on, some things must change. And I think the philosophy that was expressed by one of the administration's advisors that says, the famous quote from Grover Norquist, "My goal is to cut government in half in 25 years, to get it down to the size where we can drown it in the bathtub." Ladies and gentlemen, I suggest that that's not a philosophy that will work. It hasn't worked for us. It won't work for you. We need an honest, effective, lean, and strategic government with the resources to be a true partner to the private sector, relying on our faith and reaching out to our faith-based communities to build a Gulf Coast region and a United States we can be proud of. Let's get to work, and God bless you all.
I think the speakers that we've had bringing this to our attention has given us a greater awareness things that we need to do, things that we need to be aware of, things that we need to work on, and directions. I hope that our awareness level, our adrenaline level has been raised to a point where we want to be involved, we want to see things change. This can't do it, I don't know what can. But there's another issue that we should feel just as passionate in the long term of our country, and that is something that is going to be brought to us by my friend and my neighbor, the Mayor of Los Angeles, Antonio Villaraigosa. He has been appointed to chair a new poverty task force that will have its first meeting this afternoon. Chicago Mayor Richard Daley and Mayor Villaraigosa discussed the need for this task force at the leadership meeting in Long Beach last September. Throughout his career, Mayor Villaraigosa has worked on addressing issues related to poverty. He spoke passionately on this subject during the recent John F. Kennedy Forum at Harvard, which was part of our new mayor's school, and I've met several of you that were at that session. And as mayors have long understood, too many of our fellow citizens still struggle with the impacts of poverty. And it became even more geographically evident following the hurricanes. And the U.S. Conference of Mayors has had a long history of advocating for progressive anti-poverty initiatives. But we must do more as a nation to ensure that macroeconomies can continue to thrive. I know many of you, through your work on standing committees and task force within the conference, have focused on key issues related to this effort. Mayor Villaraigosa and I look forward to your continued participation in this effort. Before I turn to the mayor for his initial thoughts, I'm also pleased to announce that, and I think you have a brochure on this, the summit that will be in Los Angeles, Cities for a Strong America Summit on Gangs. It will be in Los Angeles on March 31st, and Mayor Villaraigosa is hosting this with the Conference of Mayors. We've already confirmed that Attorney General Alberto Gonzalez will participate in the summit, so please plan on being at this important event also. But I'm so pleased he's with us for the first time. He has been in public service for a long time, but just recently elected as mayor of the second largest city in the United States, Los Angeles. He has been a great partner with us in the Conference of Mayors and with me as an adjoining city. The city of Long Beach and Los Angeles have the contiguous ports. I'm so pleased to introduce to you Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa.
Fellow mayors, my name is Antonio Villaraigosa, and I didn't know I was going to get introduced. I'm mayor of the city of Los Angeles. Allow me to say what an honor it is to be here. I feel a little bit like the new kid on the block. Of course, I've seen many of you around campus, and I want to say how grateful I am to each and every one of you for welcoming me as a colleague and for treating me as a friend. It's a thrill to be here. Thank you all. It's an even greater privilege to be able to say why I'm here, to announce the formation of the U.S. Conference of Mayors Task Force on Poverty and Opportunity in America. I want to thank Richard Daley, Mayor of Chicago. I said to him privately, and I'll say again, there's not a better run big city in the United States of America, and it's because of his leadership, and I thank you. I thank you for your pivotal role in conceiving this idea, and I want to thank my friend and neighbor, our president, Beverly O'Neill of Long Beach, for helping to bring the task force to life. I'd also like to thank Mayor Williams for hosting us in this beautiful city, as he has so many times, and Mr. Jackson for his words. Thank you, Tom, for bringing us all together today. I want to say a word about the speakers who came before me. Mayor Ray Nagin of New Orleans, Mayor A.J. Holloway of Biloxi, Mayor Manuel Diaz of Miami, and Senator Mary Landrieu of Louisiana, each of whom has spoken with conviction and clarity about the effects of Hurricane Katrina and the monumental challenges of repopulating and rebuilding the great cities of the Gulf Coast. I know I speak for the mayors assembled here when I say that your cities will be back stronger than ever. And I know that you can count on the men and women in this room to work with you and to fight for you side by side each and every step of the way to ensure that Washington honors its commitment to the communities still struggling to survive the storm. As mayors, we understand that while the floodwaters may have receded, we still need to move to higher ground. We know that this rebuilding effort isn't just about repairing levees and reclaiming lost neighborhoods. It's about rebuilding and restoring our sense of national community. We know that the desolation of the Gulf Coast revealed a more profound gulf in America, a gulf between the words we etch in marble and the realities that we've come to accept as set in stone. A gulf between the basic promise of opportunity for all and the continuing chasm of race and class across our country. A gulf between those at the very top of the economic ladder who are earning more and doing better than they ever have, and the growing number of Americans who are working harder and slipping back. Above all else, Katrina exposed the deepening gulf in our larger political discourse, a gulf in our understanding of our obligations to one another as Americans, and in our shared conception of the common good. As mayors, I think we can all agree that we saw reflections of all our cities in the faces of the people stranded on the rooftops of the lower Ninth Ward. You certainly don't need to go to New Orleans, and you don't need to be from the South to understand the crippling effects of persistent poverty in this country. Come with me to South Los Angeles. Go to the south side of Chicago. Go to the South Bronx. Go to Southeast Washington, and you see the same faces and the same stories. You see more children growing up in poverty in America today than in any other leading industrialized nation. My city of Los Angeles, the undisputed commercial and cultural capital of the richest, wealthiest nation in the world, you see close to 10,000 homeless children. Thousands of kids arriving in our public schools every day, and they don't have a bed to go to at night. 50 years after Brown versus Board of Education, 1/3 of African American children still living in poverty. 6 million school children on the verge of failing out. 11 million Americans who can't read a bus schedule or fill out a job application. 3.5 million people living and sleeping in shelters and doorways and underpasses. And in the cities across this country, from New Orleans to Cleveland, Atlanta to LA, we still see the same historical concentrations of the very poor. Working families isolated in communities without the basic services that most Americans take for granted as the essential preconditions to a decent life. Communities plagued by higher levels of crime and lower levels of home ownership, where opportunity seems a faint echo in those neighborhoods where fewer than 1 in 10 residents has a college degree, where vacant storefronts and a lack of business competition conspire with the unforgiving laws of market economics to force the very people with the least money to pay the highest prices for the most inferior goods, where too many people access to capital is limited to the pawn shop and the payday loan service. And we know that the problem is even deeper than that. We know that any meaningful discussion of the problems of the working poor can't be confined to the outdated paradigm describing some other America, some distant America, separate from our lives, unconnected to our concerns, and remote from our values. We know that the tired old myth describing the poor as victims of their own lack of imagination and drive is both factually and morally wrong.
We know that most poor people in America today work, and we know that growing numbers of working Americans who we don't technically define as poor are dancing on the razor's edge of subsistence. With savings rates at historic lows, the average American is carrying $8,500 in credit card debt. And just to get by, most families are spending more than they earn. In the last 4 years, over 4 million Americans have slipped from the working class to the underclass. And with the shape of poverty being rapidly recast in the accelerating story of global economic change, the issue is moving from the margins to the mainstream. Families are working harder than ever today, struggling to make ends meet in the face of stagnant and declining wages, losing ground against the escalating costs of energy, tuition, medical care, and child care. And they're struggling to keep faith with that basic idea, the defining thread of our common national story. The idea that in America, hard work earns real rewards, that work builds individual wealth, that it yields generational progress, that if you work hard, as Mayor A.J. said, and you pay your taxes and you take care of your kids, you ought to have a reasonable expectation of a good life. What's more, you should be able to look forward to the future secure in the knowledge that your children will have greater opportunities than you had. Mayors, we need to restore this faith and keep this basic American promise. We need to change the terms of the debate about the working poor. We need to return to a set of civic values in which we once again measure ourselves as a people against our greatest moral challenges. And above all, we need to recognize that the single greatest issue of poverty in America today is the poverty of our aspirations and the paucity of our ideas. It is a question of will. And fellow mayors, I know that it may sound like an obvious thing to say, but we should never hesitate to remind ourselves what a great country America is. You see, I know something about poverty, and I know many of you do too. I wouldn't be here today if this great country hadn't been there for me. If a man named Herman Katz, a great public school teacher in a struggling urban school, hadn't reached out and offered me his hand. A man who literally gave me a second chance, who paid for my SAT exams and who showed me that I could aspire and that I could make it to one of California's great public universities. And I did. I graduated with a degree from UCLA, but only with the sustaining support of federally backed loans and grants. This is a great country, I know. In America, you can make it from the lowest rung of the ladder to the highest office in the greatest city in the world. It is a question of will, and not individual will alone. I'm speaking of collective will. And I will tell you this, I believe that the mayors of America are uniquely positioned to provide the leadership on this issue that has been so sorely lacking. Cities are not only the places where the greatest concentrations of poor exist, it's in cities where you see the greatest concentration of creativity and innovation in public service today. And cities have always been the places where the miracle of American pluralism has drawn its breath and taken life. Mayors, we need to take this challenge head on. We need to dream again. We need to be bold. We need to be willing to take risks. We need to be unafraid to upset the orthodoxies of the left and the right. We need to transform the debate from inside the Beltway to across America's heartland. Poverty is not a Democratic issue or a Republican issue. It is an American tragedy. And the erosion of our middle class and the declining living standards of our working poor is not a matter of partisan politics. It is the first order question of our global competitiveness and our common national interest. Fighting poverty is not just the responsibility of government alone, or families alone, or religious institutions alone, or the private sector alone. It's all of us. And so I'm asking for the active participation of every mayor in this room and across the country. I'm asking you all to take part in the work of the task force on poverty and opportunity. And I can assure you that the work of this task force will not be dictated by a chair who's only been mayor for 6 months. We need your voices and your vision. It is my hope that together, in partnership, we'll be willing to ask and we will be eager to find the honest answers to the hardest questions. Questions like, where can we agree as mayors that past strategies have failed us? Where have the recent innovations been, both inside and outside of government? Does the federal government's measure of poverty bear any relationship to the lives of families struggling to survive in the economy of the 21st century? How do current state and federal policies stifle innovation and hinder our ability to solve the problems of real people? And how can we pursue a national strategy to truly widen the circle? A strategy that builds on the skills of our workforce and promotes the growth of good jobs in sectors vital to our ability to compete around the world over the long term. And we need to do more than issue findings. We will be missing the meaning of this moment if we do not take this as an action-oriented effort. It is my hope that America's mayors will be able to stand together on the foundation of our work, to lock arms together, to speak together with one voice, to articulate with commanding moral authority a pragmatic, problem-solving agenda for change. My hope is that we will draw on the best ideas, no matter where they come from and without regard to party affiliation. We will take up the President's challenge to confront poverty with bold action. We will look for ways to create a genuine ownership society in which working people enjoy greater opportunities to expand their assets and build their wealth. We should examine the Senate Republicans' call for the expansion of individual development accounts that help working people save for a down payment, pay for college, and start small businesses. We should consider the idea of providing housing vouchers to working families, allowing them to move physically from the margins into the economic mainstream. We should look for ways to maximize the impact of charitable giving and to fully engage our religious partners in this conversation. And we should challenge the private sector to stake a greater claim in the futures of our cities. We should examine how we can better leverage our public pension portfolios to build wealth in our neediest areas. We should find ways that we can make better uses of the resources we already have. But fellow mayors, we all need to ask the fundamental questions. Whether it's fair to set the minimum wage at a level where no family can get by. Whether it's really in our economic interest to favor tax policies that reward investors and punish the people who work. Whether we can be truly healthy as a nation when 48 million people don't have health insurance. And we need to face the biggest question of all. How can we rescue our failing public schools? We know that one of the greatest predictors of a child's chances in life can be counted in the number of books in his parents' homes. We know that the greatest anti-poverty program in American history has been the universal adoption of free and compulsory public education. And we know that across America, our schools are failing to reach the very kids most in need. In my city, and hear this, over 70% of middle school students are consigned to failing schools. Mayors, we need to take the issue of education reform to the front and center of the debate about poverty and opportunity. It's time to get past the partisan culture wars that move us beyond the divisive distractions about teaching intelligent design and proceed to the fundamental question of how we can intelligently design our schools in a way that gives all our kids a shot at a better life. I know that there are many related issues that I didn't have time to touch on here this morning. I look forward to discussing them with you in detail as the work of this task force gets underway. I believe that America's mayors are up to the task. Hurricane Katrina may have reminded us of the great unfinished work of our democracy, but it also illuminated the way. Our people responded as a community, and our nation's cities reached out as good neighbors. Let's seize the moment. Let's change this debate. Let's lead the way. Thank you all.
As I said earlier, this was also discussed between Mayor Daley, Mayor of Chicago, and with Antonio Villaraigosa. I'd like to ask Mayor Daley to say a few words on this item before we have our last speaker, please. Mayor Daley.
Thank you very much, President O'Neill, and to each and every one of the members of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. First of all, I want to congratulate the conference again for thinking outside the box, of course, and making decisions. That's what mayors do every day. Mayor Nagin proved that, Mayor Holloway, others that proved that in time of crisis, before, during, and after. Mayors are there in each and every one of the communities. And I really believe it's because U.S. Conference of Mayors. And to each and every one of you, I think the call on public service, the people of our communities understand us, and especially poverty, because we see it on a personal basis. We know about it, we understand it. We see the gap between rich and poor growing, as the mayor pointed out. But during 1973 to 2004, the last 3 decades, our national poverty has increased from an all-time low of 11% to over 12%. Let me put in the other words. During that period, the Dow Jones Industrial Average increased from around 900 in 1973 to over 10,000 in 2004. In other words, while the nation's economy grew by 1,100%, the amount of poverty actually increased. That is basically unacceptable. As I said many times, education is, I believe, the only and most powerful weapon in the war on poverty. And the gap between rich and poor is growing wider every year, because whole segments of our society has had a second-class education and second-class opportunities. As a result, too many of our children are unable to compete. Too few of them are being trained in high-tech industries for the future. We need to rebuild the education infrastructure of America when we talk about poverty, literally beginning with all our school buildings. The federal government puts little or nothing into school construction, forcing all our local governments to find money for modern science labs, school libraries, and classrooms. In the last decade, we have spent, in the city of Chicago, $4.5 billion on school construction and repair in Chicago. Yet, we still have buildings more than 100 years old, science labs from the 1950s, libraries that now have entered digital age. The federal government should set a goal of modernizing every school building in America in partnership with state and local governments. The federal government also needs to play a stronger role in the national effort to improve all of our high schools. It needs to fully fund tutoring requirements called for in the No Child Left Behind law. In Chicago, we have more than 200,000 children who qualify for tutoring, but we have only enough money for 56,000. Next, we should challenge the federal government to expand one of the most successful programs called Head Start to every child who needs it. Head Start has put millions of American children into preschool, but millions more are yet enrolled. That means they are not ready to learn when they enter school at the age of 5. From preschool on one end to high school on the other, there is a great opportunity for the federal government to show more leadership in education, even as we move forward with reform on all our local levels. Besides the education, one of the biggest concerns is that so many low and moderate income families fail to take advantage of all the financial assistance that are available to each and every one of them. I think we're all familiar with the Earned Income Tax Credit. Last year, the EITC provided refunds averaging about $2,000 to low-income working families. It has been credited with lifting thousands of families out of poverty. Yet, 10 to 15% of potential EITC dollars go unclaimed each year, partly because people aren't aware of it, partly because the application forms are too complicated. Many people end up paying $150 or more to commercial tax preparers to fill out the forms. So there goes a big chunk of that $2,000 refund. Then they waste more money on a high-interest loan so they can walk out the door with a refund check. Many poor people also are failing to take advantage of food stamps. According to a recent study, more than $120 million in food stamps went unclaimed in 2003 just in the Chicago area. That's an average of $1,140 a year that's being left on the table by 157,000 of the neediest residents of the city and surrounding suburbs. There is no doubt that your own local economies are losing millions of dollars each year simply because your low-income families are not receiving all the federal assistance they're entitled to. And keep in mind that this money will be plowed right back into your local economies and not spent on foreign travel or offshore investments. In Chicago, we have subsidized 2 non-for-profit organizations that provide free tax preparations for families making under $38,000 a year, making sure they're getting their EITC refunds. We also operate 3 family assistance centers where poor and working families can learn about all the federal, state, and local programs. We are sponsoring a series of community service fairs to help out our own residents in much the same way we helped out the victims of Hurricane Katrina. But we could use more help from the federal government. Poor people shouldn't have to hire tax advisors, and they shouldn't have to basically find their way through government bureaucracy. Just to fill out a form, they can only call basically a lawyer to basically understand these forms. They should be able to go to a single office to get the help they need and entitled to. I believe it's time for the federal government to simplify and modernize its financial assistance programs and do a better job of publicizing them. I can guarantee you that the rich get every dollar of federal aid they're entitled to. Poor people should too. They're the only ones who really need this money. And I believe the majority of Americans from both political parties sincerely want to reduce the size of the gap between rich and poor in this nation. But I firmly believe who's going to lead the challenge. It is you, the mayors, who have the leadership quality, thinking outside the box, but most importantly, willing to make the decisions on behalf of your people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mayor Daley. I think we have this afternoon the first meeting of the poverty session task force, and I think we have the challenge, and it covers everything in our cities. I'd like to introduce George Cloutier right now. One of the things that can strengthen us is our small businesses. We have small businesses in our communities that are the mainstay of our business environment. Partner America is in its 6th year. That brings the small businesses with the mayors so that we can add to our strength of small businesses in our community, and we have just renewed our commitment to fostering those relationships between mayors and small businesses by signing a 20-year agreement with the American management to continue the Partner America program. So the man that is leading the nation's foremost, he is the nation's foremost expert on small business, is George Cloutier, Chairman and CEO of American Management Services. And there's really no better advocate than George heading up the 24 million small businesses across our nation. He's making sure that we connect with them as mayors. I'd like to introduce to you one of our platinum partners, George Cloutier.
Okay. I realize I'm the only thing between lunch, between us and lunch, so we'll zip right through this. Thank you, Mayor O'Neill. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Mayor Palmer, Mayor Nagin, and my good friend, Mayor Guido. Wow, 20 more years together. The next time Tom Cochran and I are on the stage renewing our Partner America Alliance for Small Business, we'll probably both be in rocking chairs. I already have mine picked out, and Tom wants his to be motorized. So we'll see in 20 years. Over the past 7 years, our strategic small business partnership, Partner America, has contributed more than $3 million to the Conference of Mayors for its important projects. That's probably the best thing that we can do when I hear the stories about how the mayors went out and helped Mayor Nagin in Louisiana and along the Gulf Coast. So I applaud you. As we look forward to an unprecedented 20 more years, we can predict with a reasonable amount of certainty that we will contribute an additional 15 to 20 million to your projects, not to my projects, but projects that you deem are the most important. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank a few people who have helped to make the program a major success. Tom Cochran, Catherine Whalen, and their staff, who first believed in American management and me, and made Partner America a reality. The current co-chairs, Mayor Barnes and Mayor Malloy, founding chairs, Mayor Johnson and Mayor Plusquillick, and all the mayors who participate in the dozens of Partner America events around the country. Our strategic alliance is all about small business. Today, the 23 million small businesses that generate more than 60% of the jobs in this country are facing unprecedented competitive challenges at every corner. Small business is the driving force behind any economic turnaround, including this one. It has historically been small business, not large corporations, that have pulled the nation out of economic slumps. But they are the forgotten majority. Unfortunately, the reality is that there have been major budget cuts at every level of the federal government which directly affect programs that benefit the 23 million small businesses. Look at some facts. More small businesses are closing than opening. From 2003 to 2004, federal contract dollars rose by 13%, yet the amount of contracting dollars that went to small businesses went down. Okay? The big businesses benefited once again. Small business took it on the short end of the stick. Even the tax cut went bust for small business. The average small business owner was supposed to receive, according to government projections, $2,000 at least. And it turns out that almost 2/3 of these will receive only $500. I find it difficult to believe that $500 to a small business person is going to persuade them to expand their business, to pay more taxes willingly, to buy new equipment, or add to their employee base. It's just not enough aid. The SBA, established specifically for small business, has taken the biggest budget hit. The cutbacks have been incredible. The 2006 budget number for the SBA has been set at $450 million, which is approximately a half a day of what we spend abroad. Down, that's $123 million from 2005 and nearly 60% from 2001. Just this year, all funding was eliminated for the 7A program, a program that is responsible for 30% of all long-term small business lending in the country. Borrowers and lenders are now faced with a dramatic hike in fees to cover what the government claims is a public-private partnership. We simply cannot afford these cuts, nor can your cities. A healthy small business sector means healthy cities. Our economic well-being and job growth depends on an empowered small business community in every city across the nation, city and town. Another example of the consequences of these budget cuts is the fact that in Louisiana, 300 businesses have received federal disaster assistance out of tens of thousands that have either applied or would like to apply. What am I missing here? What is going on that we can't give these people the appropriate money to get that sector going again? Because in Mayor Nagin's case, in the Gulf Coast in general, those small businesses, you pointed out, have disappeared. They've just disappeared. They disappeared because they have no money. And they're not coming back until they first get some money, the gasoline of building a business, to start that business again. You can bring the 500,000 people back, you can bring 1 million people back, but if you don't put money into those small businesses, they're not coming back. They're going to go somewhere else, or they're going to disappear, just disappear. Frankly, there has been a great deal of lip service, Mayor Nagin on national television put it a little differently, and very little action taken under both past and current administrations. By more funding of small business loan programs, new jobs would be created and the economy would benefit in each and every community. Examples, for $300 to $350 million, virtually all the programs could be funded at levels authorized by Congress. Some other numbers, if fully funded, the SBA's 7A and 504 loan programs would be creating an estimated 742,000 jobs across the country. Imagine if we actually put $1 billion out, what it could do, because it's a total multiplier effect. If fully funded, the SBA Small Business Development Centers could create 90,000 jobs. Another $500 million could create 450,000 jobs. If the SBA were fully funded, the government could meet its contracting goals and increase the number of contracts to hub-zone firms by $10 billion, to women-owned businesses by $6 billion, and to service disabled veterans $8 billion a year. What's wrong with spending, as someone once said, $500 million to make all that happen? If small business is to grow and prosper, we need to increase, not decrease, funding for the SBA. For more than 70 years, the mayors, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, has been the voice of America's cities, a leader in setting the nation's metropolitan agenda. I am asking the mayors and the conference to endorse the increase in funding for small business, and more specifically, to at least restore the funding to a desperately needed agency desperately in need. You have been, and you remain today, the most effective bridge between local needs and federal policymakers. You, more than any other group, understand that a strong metro economy requires a robust small business sector. It is vital that our nation, states, and cities rally behind the cause of small business. A strong small business means a strong economy for all of us. Small business is the true heart of the American economy. See you in 20 years. Thank you.
I thank you all. If this session doesn't get your blood going to make a difference, because you are in a position to do so, nothing will. We have about 4 plenary sessions during this conference. I hope you're all part of that, because this is the face of America, the face of the mayors of the United States. We have a luncheon for the arts following at 12:30. We'll see you there. Thank you very much for being here.